you want to start?
We can't do it in the stages. We got a couple of forms. I'll call the Wednesday, June 29th, 2022 meeting of the Cumberland Planning Board to order. Roll call, Ms. Rashich,
Here.
Mr. McDonald. Here. Mr. Butler.
Here.
Mr. Scown.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Ms. Reese is not here yet. Mr. Ambrosia is not here yet. Ms. Costa's not here yet, so, but the chair is here. Okay. Okay. Before I begin, I have an announcement that this meeting is also being held virtually on the Zoom platform. If you have an interest in any item on the agenda, we will turn on your audio and promote you to a panelist as the item is called. If you would like to comment or ask a question, please raise your hand by clicking on the button labeled "Raise Hand" when the chairman opens the floor for public comment. Director's report, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission or committee. I want to report out briefly that the town of Cumberland has recently been awarded a $100,000 grant from the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation to perform a economic revitalization and social equity plan for Valley Falls and Lonsdale. The town went to the market for consultancy and interviewed four very highly qualified consultants and selected 4 Ward Planning of New York. They were awarded the agreement by the council on June 1st, and their work will take place over the course of 9 or 10 months. This is to dovetail with the anticipated redevelopment of Ann and Hope, Narshaw, and St. Patrick. State is obviously making investment in this corridor to dovetail with the DOT project, the $18 million DOT project, and with an interest in having this corridor going from Pawtucket, Central Falls, all the way to Mendon Road to have a distinct identity, enhancements that have a unifying elements and more trees and all that. So the Ward is going to reach out to the business community, the local property owners, have some meetings, focus groups. They're going to develop some web content. They're going to ID assets and trends. Again, they're going to focus on these 3 redevelopment opportunities and attempt to provide a third-party professional statement and assessment and advocacy for best development scenarios for the area. They're going to look at New Pond Park. They're also going to help us with branding, placemaking, how to make strategic investments. There's a prospect of advocating for zoning, a rezoning that might take some properties that are underused and provide a pathway for them to be more easily developed and more attractive for investments. They're also going to be focused on connectivity, bicycling, hiking, and the like, so that natural areas and cultural assets and commercial assets are better connected, and also affordable housing. So I didn't want to belabor this, but I wanted to make you aware that this important planning initiative, which has really been championed by Glenn, is going forward, and you'll be hearing more about it shortly. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Board have any questions for Mr. Stevens? Hearing none, thank you. Mr. Pottington, you had mentioned that you had no objection to moving a couple of the items around. Which one would you like to start on?
I just wanted to comment on 2 items. If we can speak on one of the 2 items involving the roads, then I just wanted to, I mean, it doesn't matter, whatever So the convenience of Mr. Duarte, he's gonna speak on both those. If you say the agenda, so you can speak to them. Otherwise,
Okay,
for now, if you,
is that okay, Mr. Duarte?
whatever you want.
Okay. Okay, fine. For the record, Mr. Imbraja had entered the chambers at 6:37 PM and Ms. Reese had entered the chambers at 6:39 PM. Well, in that case, we'll just continue on. All right, okay. This is a waiver request. The applicant is Bradford Dean. The location is Staples Road, Assessors Plat 44, Lot 57. The applicant requests a waiver from the Land Development and Subdivision Regulations for road pavement width. Mr. Modica?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant needs to improve Staples Road in front of his property in order to meet minimum lot frontage requirements. These roadway improvements are shown on the printed plan that we provided to you just this evening. The applicant is requesting a waiver of the land development and subdivision regulations, which requires 26-foot pavement width. Since the current roadway approach on the east is already paved at 20 feet, the applicant is proposing 20 feet of pavement. So your packet also includes an administrative subdivision plan where the applicant will be transferring land to the town to create enough width for the public road. And in the near future, the neighboring property on Plat 44, Lot 10, which is 71 Staples Road, will also be transferring property to the town to improve this road. So the planning department recommends that the planning board approve this request for a waiver from the minimum pavement width. And we're basing this recommendation on the recommendation of our new Public Works Director, Mr. Joe Duarte, who is here tonight. He can answer your question.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Modica? At this point, Mr. Partington?
Yeah, very good. As I will, you probably hear me saying often this evening, planning department has done a good job of setting forth the basics on this. I want to thank Mr. Duarte for and Mr. Entow for meeting with us and helping us resolve this issue. There was a number of things going on here. As you all know, Staples Road is the quintessential country road. There was actually the suggestion was to straighten the road out a little bit for safety reasons, which the client was happy to accommodate Mr. Duarte in that respect. And that's why we're going to be deeding some land to the town as part of this administrative subdivision. It also hopefully heads off a possible issue with a neighbor across the street who had some questions about the property lines of the road and the survey. So we're moving this to the south. Everything's being moved to the south. We've already obtained at least verbal permission. I'm not sure if the client actually has a written permission. I know the solicitor had forwarded Mr. Dean a form or a suggested form for the owner of Assessors Plat 44 Lot 10 to sign, acquiescing in the further giving of property over to the town for the benefit of straightening the road out. So there's going to be approximately from that abutting land to the west. There's going to be, and I talked to, even though the actual meets and bounds description hasn't been completed yet, they gave you a plus or minus figure of 574 square feet coming from the adjoining lot to the west. So once if we can get the waiver approval for the 20-foot wide road, which as I think you all know is pretty consistent with what Staples Road is now, then we'll begin the administrative subdivision process.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Partington? Mr. Duarte, do you have anything to add?
Good evening, honorable board members. Mr. Partington is correct as far as describing the roadway as being very country. It is, the 20 feet is consistent with the remainder of the road that has been developed. Roadway geometry is all over the place, none of which right now would meet today's standards. And so we're trying to be consistent as far as we can with the roadway designs. So the 20-foot wide road would be the minimum we would approve, and so we are recommending approval of the 20-foot roadway width. The design plans, there is going to be some minor modifications, which I don't know if would be incorporated into the approval tonight with a waiver whereby if you saw the letter from Mr. James Ento on June 17th, where we do recommend a 20-foot wide roadway, but we want to make sure that a bond is established as well as meeting final design plans that would be approved by the Department of Public Works. There's some minor changes we're going to need, such as guardrail extensions and types and so forth, but we're very close. That the plan ultimately will look a lot like what was submitted to you as far as the engineered plans. There will be some minor changes, but we are recommending to go forward with this approach. The roadway changes, I think, would be better safety purposes. A little bit more difficult on the developer side where there would be more expenditure and rock removal, such as ledge on the shoulders. But in the end, I think we will have a much better road design, and we are recommending for the waiver.
Board have any questions for Mr. Duarte?
Those conditions was put on the record. We are not the property developers for those conditions.
On the waiver, do we have a motion?
Mr. Modica, can the motion just be a straight approval of the waiver request, or should we add the condition about the performance bond, or
The Public Works Department will handle
we'll
the.
handle all that stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So in regards to 0 Staples Road, Assessors Plat 44, Lot 57, I'd make a motion that the request for a waiver for a 20-foot width road be approved based on the memo from James Ento and Mr. Duarte dated June 17th, 2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Scown. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Chair votes yes. Motion carries. So let's see, the next item, and I believe, Mr. Partington, you're here for this one also. Okay. This is for a town council recommendation. The applicant is Alexander Ewick. The location is Powhatan Street intersecting Narragansett Avenue, approximately 700 feet south of Diamond Hill Road, and intersecting Iroquois Road, approximately 800 feet south of Phillip Avenue, running east-west between Iroquois Road and Narragansett Road, bounded by Assessors Plat 18, lots 209, 229, 230, and 245. The applicant requests a town council recommendation to abandon Powhatan Road. Mr. Modica.
Mr. Chair, for this matter, I'm going to defer to our Public Works Director, Mr. Duarte.
Mr. Duarte.
So we received this request, and we did a site visit and reviewed the concerns that could be raised, the usefulness of the road. When you do a road abandonment, you typically have to look at if there's any further usefulness for the public. And if there isn't, then we could make a recommendation for abandonment. Sometimes there are utilities where easements may be required. Upon observation and, although there may not be vehicular usefulness in the future, it is a very difficult steep slope, and there may not be a need for vehicular use. It does serve a purpose for stormwater flow. I think if this was somehow altered in any way, that could be a detriment in the future to properties. On the up gradient of this, so the road runs from one gradient, a higher elevation gradient on Iroquois Road, down gradient to Narragansett Drive, I think it is, Narragansett Avenue. And what happens is stormwater on Iroquois Road naturally flows down this road, down from the upper gradient of Iroquois Road down to the down gradient of Narragansett. We're always concerned, we run into this quite often whereby things get altered and then later in time, it's the taxpayers that are on the hook for any improvements that may be done, that may be required to alleviate, flooding conditions that could occur or stormwater coming onto their property. So we're always a little concerned about any event of to that nature. So I still think there's usefulness of this property. It is a town asset. I believe it's still usefulness. And if I could draw your attention to the second page, third page, where there's photographs, especially the bottom photograph that's labeled Pawanton Street from Iroquois Road. I don't know if everybody's on that already. As you can see, there is a driveway on one side and on the other side is a lawn property with a hedgerow in between. Although I can't specifically tell you exactly where the center of the road is, I believe it follows somewhat that hedgerow. And right now the water flows down that driveway, accumulates at the bottom near that stockade fence, and then makes its way down the path. As you can see, the property owner with the hedgerow and the lawn is established. There's already some creeping into town property, the town road. This happens, and the water is now being pushed onto the driveway that's also been built on the town road. So these things happen. They may not happen with the current applicant, but it could happen generations later. And then the taxpayer later is on the hook for roadway runoff that ultimately goes onto people's lands and causes all sorts of things. And with the climatic change that we've seen, stormwater events are more frequent now, they're more severe in nature, and therefore it's of great of concern to us now. Are there remedies that could happen here? I think so. If the applicant was willing to evaluate the stormwater flow in that area and propose an elaborate stormwater system that would accommodate the stormwater flow to, say, at least the 100-year frequency storm, and then whatever structures, maybe subgrade structures or above grade structures, to the satisfaction of Public Works, and then make its way to an ultimate control path. I think such a thing could happen. That was not proposed on this request. So we have nothing to work with. And so the natural reaction would be to deny abandonment due to the fact that we still think there's usefulness for the taxpayer for the roadway.
But I have any questions for Mr. Duarte? Mr. Pennington?
Scott Partington for the road abandonment applicant. Again, I appreciate Mr. Duarte's comments, and also we've spoken, as he's always very accessible and very responsive, excuse me. I would just offer, and I'm not sure this is really the forum for it, perhaps more so with the council. However, it's my position on this that this, as like many of the plats in Cumberland, it was platted a long time ago. This road was not platted as a drainage conduit. It was platted as a street. I dare say that if it was paved, we'd have a lot worse drainage problems on Narragansett and the bottom of the hill. I believe that the cease of use to the public is used as vehicular access. That's my position, and that's a position that I think we're going to take with the council. However, in lieu of spending a ton of money to get drainage calculations and fix what was done several years ago, if Mr. Duarte is saying that the status quo of that road accommodates the current drainage flow, then I'd be willing to suggest that whoever is going to take part or receive any property, there were 4 lots in this now, right? There were 4 lots that are immediately contiguous, Pawanton Road, okay, a street. If all of those, if a condition is that no one can construct anything in what was the paper street, or some kind of easement back, a development type of easement back to the town, something that would prevent anything from interfering with the drainage flow through that street. I mean, there's no intent. I spoke to the applicant, and he has no intention. This is for setback purposes only. I mean, it's got nothing to do with wanting to construct anything in this throughway. So I would just think that a far more equitable way to approach it would be that, you know, there'd be some type of restriction placed on the fact that nothing can affect the current drainage pattern, which, from what I gather from Mr. Duart's comments, may not be 100% perfect, but it accommodates what's happening there now. So, again, I mean, I think that as far as it being useful to the public, generally, as an additional drainage conduit, I don't think I could argue with that. But I think that again, I think it was platted as a public street, and I think it's access is what is the use to the public. And as a matter of fact, you know, I can tie this in a little bit, even though they're not really the same issue, but if someone is damaged by the taking of a road or abandonment, and the Supreme Court spoke on this, it was my case many years ago. The damages can only be asserted by the contiguous landowners. And those damages can only be related to the denial of access. So my position, again, probably more so for the council, will be more in a legal sense, but for the concerns that may be raised by Public Works and obviously the planning board in your capacity as an advisory body, I would just respectfully suggest that that at the very least, that we could have some kind of a positive advisory with the restriction or the condition that there be no construction of any type that takes place within that, what was previously the roadway. Thank you.
Mr. Scown, you have a question?
Sure.
Lot 245 is already infringing on that particular roadway.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's,
So, you know.
well, you can't adversely possess against a municipality, so, you know, I don't know what action the town may take in the future in that respect, but, so, I mean, they haven't gained, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't represent the owner of 245, but I would assume that that point, he has gained no prescriptive rights to that.
No,
right
no,
away.
I guess my point is if we did go ahead with what you're suggesting, there's already somebody that's infringed on that. So is
Yes.
that going to give the other abutters the right to infringe on it as well?
Right, and again, I have all the respect in the world for Mr. Duarte and his concerns, and I understand, and it is an incredible slope with any, I'm sure you've probably all at least been down in that area at one point or another. My position also, and the people who are on the undeveloped lots, they're gonna build there anyway. I mean, I'd be very surprised if we went to the zoning board for setbacks. I've been doing it for many years, and I can't imagine that would be denied. You know, the right to build, but I mean, you'd have to deal with setback issues at that point. This resolves that problem for a road, a platted road that serves absolutely no purpose for access. And to accommodate Mr. Duarte and any concerns that the planning board may have, I would strongly recommend to the builder that, you know, that listen, if everybody wants on board, any of those 4 lots want on board, they're gonna have to understand that nothing can be done to affect the drainage pattern. So.
Board have any other questions?
Thanks for
Yes,
listening.
who do you represent? Which lot?
230,
Okay. And that's a vacant lot right now?
it's a vacant lot. Yeah.
So they're looking possibly to build in the future and they're looking to, they are gonna build and
Yes,
they want more setback there.
that's correct, that's correct. That's for that purpose only, and I can speak only for at least, I know that Mr. Ewick has spoken to the other individuals and this has all come secondhand to me. I did not speak with them myself, but, and, you know, they were all interested because the first thing that he said was, look, if it's abandoned, do you want to sell your portion or do you want to waive your portion? And they all seem to be interested in getting their piece of whatever they abut. on the street. So I can at least speaking for Mr. Ewick, he's perfectly fine with agreeing not to effectuate any type of construction or anything that would affect the drainage flow within that area that was the street.
Ms. McDonald, you had a question?
I have confusion as well as question. It's not laid out here, at least as far as I can see. Where are the property lines? Is this paper road within property lines now?
I mean, as far as, I mean, what the survey tells me, there is a paper street and there's been an indication there's some encroachment. But that to the extent, I mean, what the lines are on the plan that's submitted, as far as I know, those are the lines.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
If,
Ms. Salvatore.
hi. I apologize that I'm here remotely. I'm actually away at my daughter's event. So I just wanted to say that for this particular discussion that there would be a survey required for an administrative subdivision at some point. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Absolutely. I agree, absolutely.
okay,
I think the question, whoop,
You know what, you do have the administrative subdivision plan from Mr. Long, right?
This was in your packet.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, I wanted to make sure, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, Mr. McDonald, that you had that, okay.
I think the question that I have at this point is that Mr. Ewick is the applicant, okay? But there are other property owners that are going to be affected. Am I correct? Because when you split the,
Yeah, I
when you,
mean, what happens,
okay.
right, what happens
Are-
is, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean to interrupt you, go ahead.
no, are the other property owners aware of this? And
Well,
we
I
heard
mean,
from
they
them?
all got notice. They're
Okay.
required to get notice of the statute. Anyone that contiguously abuts the proposed abandonment or the street lines receives notice. And I've been told that the applicant in this case has spoken to the abutting neighbors, but they've gotten notice.
okay, because there are 3 other property owners
Right,
that will be
Right,
affected. And
absolutely,
I'm just wondering if
right.
what their position is.
And they would get a piece of.
Correct, that's
you know,
why I'm
right,
asking.
right.
Because they will get a piece
The part
Oh.
that abuts
yes, a piece of the street,
right,
right? Is that that's split half
Correct.
and half?
their frontage, right.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if they're aware of it, not that they wouldn't want to gain some extra land.
Sure.
It's just a matter of
Well,
we're dealing with one applicant here, and I was
Well,
just curious.
right. Well, from a damage perspective, the Supreme Court has said that putting aside for the moment, the usefulness to the public, if you're talking about contiguous landowner to the street, the Supreme Court has made it clear that their damages are like eminent domain. Okay, they could be compensated for the loss of the access to the road. So that would be the limitation. I mean, if I get your concern correctly, I mean, that would be the limitation of their damages. Now, they could come in, one of them could come into the council and say, oh, no, I mean, I drive my car on it all the time. I've had that happen. So, I mean, but I don't think that's going to be the case here. It's not uncommon, at least in my experience, for one abutting landowner to file the initial abandonment application. And then once, if it's granted, then, we're responsible for having the town we prepare the deeds and the meets and bounds descriptions, and the town would deed the respective portions, as you say, to the individual frontage owners.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
just also want to advise the board, not that it's relevant specifically to this board's decision, but I did discuss with Mr. Partington that there was legislation proposed, and I believe it was actually adopted by the state legislature. that the town can ask, or not ask, but basically charge for the abandonment at this point, like they do in several other towns. So that may become an issue if the other property owners do not wish to participate. And how that would be resolved is the applicant would obtain all of the land, or the land that they actually wish to acquire, if that makes sense.
And and the solicitor's office did apprise me of that, which I appreciate. And that's been also related to the client. And again, it depends on, a lot, I mean, now there may be an additional hurdle for someone else who has a contiguous right to it. Is not only is there going to be a restriction, let's say someone says they want to put a fence on it, for instance, and Mr. Duarte says, well, that fence, I'm going to have a problem with that fence because it is going to affect the drainage pattern. Then they're out, fence is out. So they've got, that's one restriction, and now they're going to come out of pocket. And there's an additional, because now, not only are they going to come out of pocket, you're going to be in the tax roll. Now, I don't know, the square footage, I mean, what is it? What is it, 400, it's what is it, 300 by, or 400 by? It's, yeah, 25 by, yeah. So, I mean, you're looking at whatever to each lot. I'm not sure how much the taxes are gonna, what's gonna mean as far as the tax increase, but they do go on the tax rolls now, okay? And they'd go on the tax rolls potentially with restrictions. So there would be, as Ms. Salvatore says, that there would be maybe other considerations for abutting landowners. And it may end up that one of the four, ends up with the road. I don't know, but I do know that I mean, these vacant lots are going to build anyway. They're pre-existing lots of record. So.
What is it? What the other lot 209
And
looks like a
if
lot.
if I may,
Go ahead.
Ms. Salvatore.
if I may, I'm only saying that because there's a conversation about everybody getting a piece. It's really not relevant to the planning board's recommendation, because it's whether or not this area has ceased to be useful to the public. But I just want to be clear, and again, it's not really relevant to this recommendation, but that piece may be divided differently than what is proposed at this point in time. That's all I mean.
Okay, Mr. DeBrosa, you had a question?
So I want to just jump on something that the chairman mentioned.
Yep.
So there are 4 properties that are involved in this potentially.
Yes,
You're representing one of them that wants to build a house on a lot.
that's correct.
When you look at the lot plans, there are wetlands that are flagged on the Narragansett Road side of the lot.
Yep.
Which would impede a driveway or, have some setback, related issues as far as building a house.
It's possible, and especially now, well, especially starting on Friday, July 1st. I mean, the DEM regulations are going to be, it's going to be a lot more draconian with respect to those items. So, yeah, I mean.
So for your client, it makes a lot of sense to try to get this to be a paper. Sorry.
And even, it's a great point. And even without that, there would be setback requirements probably on a lot of that size. To build a house of a reasonable size, you're going to need some kind of some sort of relief. So, his position is, look, I mean, if I can abandon the road, it's only for setback purposes, that's it. But your point is well taken.
If they build the house and sell it to somebody, what's to stop them from doing some kind of changes to that portion of what is now their lot?
Well, if there's a restriction, I mean, I can't speed, I gotta take it. I don't, I mean, there's a restriction, there's a restriction.
Quite honestly, I don't know many people who know about the restrictions on their lots. Even if it's in their deed, I don't know if people have read their deed that carefully, you know what I mean?
I agree with that.
But without, if we don't abandon it, we know it probably won't happen because the homeowner will probably know where their lot line is. But knowing they own another 25 feet and may go in and make some changes in there, which may hurt the drainage in the area or change it.
Right, I think that first of all, I would think that obviously, um, this is as an undeveloped parcel. And now you know, Mr. Bush, you're looking at a situation where someone's gonna have to go in from scratch. And, you know, everything they do has to comply with current regulations. If the building inspector, or the zoning official is made aware that, the council abandoned a road and imposed restrictions on any building within that area, they simply couldn't do it. It's like any other regulation that you people enforce all the time. I mean, look, I mean, are there people who are gonna try to ask for forgiveness rather than permission? How many times have you seen that, right? So, I mean, that's a distinct possibility. Anytime we put through any kind of legislation with the council that imposes restrictions, or anything with the zoning board, or anything with the planning board that imposes restrictions, you always run that risk, and you hope that, you know, that our, our vigilant officers of the town are going to be able to enforce, you know, any scofflaws in that respect.
But my only point is if we don't abandon it, then we probably won't run into that problem.
Well, you probably won't. I mean, I guess unless the extent that if someone encroaches, right? I mean, so if someone encroaches, let's say that the road is not abandoned, you give a negative recommendation, the council sides with the planning board, takes the advisory, and there's no abandonment. And in that case, then someone could, like, what is it, was it 245 or what, was it 245 that encroached? So, I mean, everyone, of course, now the antenna are up a little bit more, so that may be a little more scrutiny in that respect. But someone could do the same thing. Now, of course, it's a lot better to someone argue, well, yeah, but that's my land. But it really down at the bottom line would be the same thing. Even though it's their land, if there was a restriction that said you cannot build that within or have any structure, and you can even make it subject to, I mean, any building permit. Obviously, Department of Public Works is going to review any building permit anyway in the routing process. So, I mean, that's going to be something that's going to be reviewed anyway. So, I'm just offering two things. One, that I believe, and again, probably not for this board, that vehicular access is what the issue is, and because that's what the intent of this platted road was. And secondly, and I think more importantly, is that if you restrict any building in that, from what I get, again, I don't want to misspeak for Mr. Duarte, that the current situation, at least as it is now, is you know, it's doable. You know, I mean, as long as nothing is done to impede the flow of the drainage coming down Iroquois to Narragansett and downhill further, then we'll leave that alone. So you're going to get, the status quo is going to be preserved in that respect.
Well, you may get more drainage from the new development also.
Well, yeah, and,
Right.
and the runoff, and, you know, when it comes to that, I mean, the runoff issues, I mean, you know, zero runoff. Those by calculation, you have to have zero runoff. You guys know that. So you know, as Mr. D'Ambrosio said, I mean, there's another couple of road, you know, hoops to jump through before, you know, he can realize. And this is, I guess, step one to try to avoid setback issue and to have a more palatable situation with, you know, respect to having a lot of a decent size.
I think the question comes down to this.
Yep.
As Ms. Salvatore had pointed out. Because some of these other issues have to be taken up by the town council. It's their bailiwick. Does the planning board believe that Powhatan Street ceases its usefulness as a street? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so as far as the planning board is concerned, even though we've got, and I raised some questions and everyone else here, very valid questions. Mr. Duarte had given us his feeling as to the usefulness of the street relative to drainage and so on. So that's where we are. All the other issues like Mr. Partington says, there's some hoops they're gonna have to jump through. Especially we don't know the nature of this wetland on the property, but right now it seems like the property, you can't access the property unless it's something that they could remedy with DEM, okay, but it looks like that. It has that,
It does, and Mr. D'Ambrosio pointed that out.
right, so it still comes down to is whether the board feels that the street has ceased its usefulness.
Well, if it's useful as a drainage area, and I understand.
Well, it's still a right of way, town right of way,
Right, it's not used as such, really, it's just,
not to traverse upon, not
Right.
as a connector between Narragansett and Iroquois.
correct,
Right.
right. It's just whether or not that we guarantee that it's kept in its natural state in order to do the job it's doing now, which is the runoff in that area. There are a lot of problems with flooding in certain areas of that neighborhood. I kind of lean.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Salvatore,
that can certainly be a part of your recommendation that you, I mean, I do agree with Mr. Partington that the question about ceasing to be useful is related to access. So for example, if this was a property that required access to one of these lots in order to improve the lot, that person would be entitled to improve the lot, improve the street, to create the access. So I think that's important. I think that Mr. Duar's comments are also important. And frankly, I think that you should include in your recommendation a statement that the drainage should be resolved by the applicant before abandonment occurs. But I do agree with Mr. Partington that the question is whether the area has ceased to be useful for public access. So.
okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I just, and I don't know if it's, you can tell with any great accuracy, it also appears that the owner of AP 18 lot 245's improvement of the paper street, in other words, the driveway, may be over the halfway point and onto the prospective abutters property if this is approved. So.
Yeah, it does from the aerial photo. It appears that it could be a little bit more than half the width of the right of way.
Mr. Chairman, again, you cannot get adverse possession over a town.
Correct.
So any encroachment into the right of way would have to be resolved by the town.
What does that mean exactly, solicitor?
I think if it's an encroachment into the other lot, they could just get an easement, could they not? If they agree.
No,
with it.
no.
If
No,
you
I
abandon
think, well, I mean, if it's abandoned, then that portion of the lot becomes part of that person's lot.
Mhm.
If it's not, then, I mean, we've had this situation where we have to contact the owner and have them take any improvements off of the town property.
Mhm.
And we've done that. I think in this case, if it's resolved in favor of the applicant, then it would be resolved easily. Because what you're saying, that if there's an encroachment, then that would actually go to that property owner. But we can resolve all that. And I'm not advocating for either position, but I'm just saying that legally, these things can be resolved through agreements, easements, and drainage requirements, things like that.
How's the board feel?
I understand Mr. Partington's arguments, and I wouldn't be surprised if he prevailed in front of the council, but I feel like our purview is fairly narrow on this, and I think Mr. Duarte made a compelling case, to me at least, that there is a drainage issue and there is the potential of adverse effects if that's interfered with. I mean, we hear testimony constantly about abutters with drainage problems, so I would hate to think we would do anything that would add to that. I think Ms. Salvatore is correct that if the council opts to side with Mr. Partington and his client, that the drainage issue should be addressed before the abandonment occurs, but my personal preference would be that we approve the planning department's recommendation that we recommend to the council denying the application based on Mr. Duarte's recommendation. That would be my feeling on it.
Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, if that is the case, which, I have no problem with, perhaps you want to say if the council wants to approve this, then these are the conditions that we suggest. So that, you're covered on all bases. You can recommend denial and then say, but if the council chooses to approve this, these are the things that we are concerned about.
Well, if we say that and say that they should have the drainage issue resolved before any abandonment, who's responsible for that? Who bears the cost? I mean, how's that?
It would all be up to the council to determine whether they want, this is a discretionary abandonment. There's no entitlement to this. So if the council chooses to grant this abandonment, they can do it on any conditions whatsoever. So if I often get concerned about people or planning boards recommending denial without anything else. Because if the council wants to approve this, then you also have concerns that I think should be identified in the event that they do approve it. So, if your motion is we recommend denial based on the public works director's concerns, that's fine. However, if the council determines that it has to be useful to the public, these are the concerns we'd like the council to address, which would be addressed by the public works director and the solicitor's office.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Partington.
I just want to make what distinction, maybe I misinterpreted the go around here, but there's a statement that was made by the solicitor, and I think it was just in a conversational way that to address the drainage issue, there was a suggestion. My position is that the drainage issue, at least from what I see and from what I heard from Mr. Duarte, is that don't mess with what's there because it works. So I don't think there's any need for us to address the drainage issue. When they go to build the houses, they're going to have to meet the requirements for runoff, period. So I think there's a big difference between saying that there's a drainage problem there now and you got to fix it before we abandon the road, and saying that this is a natural pathway and it works, don't mess it up. I think those are two very different things. So if in other
Mr.
words,
Chairman, I'm not trying to make,
Yes. Ms.
I
Salvatore?
just want to
I
clarify
don't
to Ms.
want to
Salvatore.
I know, I don't want to interrupt. It's hard on Zoom, but my point is, I'm not trying to make this complicated. You're asking for a recommendation tonight. If we don't want to continue this matter for a more detailed request, I would just suggest that you say address, and that can mean anything. That can mean leave it alone. It can mean provide an easement. I don't know what that means. But if you want a positive recommendation from this board, or if you want, a denial with conditions that I think will actually assist your client, then this is what I'm proposing. I don't think that we need to get to, it's a recommendation, as you know, Mr. Partington. So if they're relying on the Public Works Director, which I don't have a problem with, but there's also this cease to be useful to the public, which I'm advising, as you have also recommended, is it relates to access. And that's what I am going to advise the council. It
Right.
relates to access.
Thank
But
you.
if there are some drainage issues, they need to be addressed, whatever that means. And that's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I guess, because if there was an if there was an abandonment, and now there are drainage issues that are created now and that somehow go in concert with the building. See, I agree that I don't want to make it complicated. I think it's very simply is that it's access, it's not drainage. That's the standard, okay? So that's the standard the council's gonna have to consider. And what I'm saying, and what I got from Mr. Duart's testimony was that I don't want that disturbed, not, you've got to go in there and put something else. And I know there was a statement made, well, maybe if they put, a complex drainage system in there. I mean, if we left it as it is, then, I assume that
But-
that's going to be okay. So.
But
I think-
Mr. Chairman, this is gonna be worked out between the parties between now and when the council gets it. That's my point. It's not gonna be, the council isn't gonna be unaware of what Mr. Duart wants, which maybe leave it alone. I don't know what he's gonna say,
Right.
but I mean, the planning board can do whatever it wants. It's a recommendation. It's not a decision.
Well, no, but, and I appreciate, I know you're going to advise the council appropriately, Ms. Salvo, as you always do. However, my experience with the council in land use situations has been, they defer heavily to the planning department, to the planning board, which, hey, those are the department heads. I understand that perfectly, but that's my only other concern.
Mr. McDonald,
Can I just ask Mr. Duarte a few questions, please?
okay. Hold on, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Duarte.
Mr. Duarte, my old eyes won't let me read this very well. It appears as if the topography of the land, it slopes from east to west, is that correct?
Yes.
It slopes towards Narragansett, is that correct?
Yes.
And did I understand you to say that there have been problems with water before in this area?
I didn't necessarily say that.
Okay.
For
What did-
this specific area.
Okay.
There are many areas of town that have issues.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't know of any of the neighbors on Narragansett Road, for instance, that have had problems with water, is that correct?
I don't know specifically. I apologize. I haven't been in town
Okay,
in this capacity in the last 20-some years. I just have a minor point of correction on Mr. Partington's statements. I never said that leaving it alone would correct the drainage problem. So if you don't abandon the road and the developer decides to build a house there anyway, we would still be concerned with stormwater flow. And we would require upon the building permit that be evaluated and adjusted however it needs to be done. So that would happen anyway. And to say you leave the road alone and the drainage solves itself, I can't tell you that. I just know it goes from Iroquois Road east to west to Narragansett. How it flows thereafter on the bottom half of Powonton. If any of it goes northerly to come south, I don't know how that works. This is why I said earlier that the applicant or whoever the interested parties, it could be all four parties adjacent to this, would need to evaluate the flow path of this drainage. And it may be a minor correction. I'm sure we could work out some arrangement with the applicants and whatever parties get involved. But to say to leave it alone, all things would be resolved, that's not necessarily true because the development, that lot in question could end up having some of this flow go onto their land, which would have to be addressed. I don't know specifically since the property is all completely overgrown. It's hard to see how the water flows right now, but this would have to be surveyed, somebody would have to evaluate the flow path and then come back with corrections. Doable, none of which is impossible. It's all doable, but it would have to be evaluated.
Scott, use the mic.
The town's gonna have to deal with any drainage problems on that road.
Not necessarily, since the water has been going there forever. Whatever water goes onto that property, it's been going there, so somebody would have to correct that on the property. We would do that now. If somebody has water going onto their property and it's flooding, they can correct it. They can show us how they're gonna do it. If they're gonna change flow paths, we would need to see that. That's not necessarily a correction the town would have to make.
Mr. Duart, in your opinion, if we approve the abandonment with restrictions that nothing can be built on the properties, if they're subdivided in 4 ways, would that be something that's acceptable?
I still think it would have to be evaluated. An engineer would have to look at the flow path of the stormwater and determine if that would be the case. What the correction, like Ms. Morris Salvatore had indicated, what that correction is, we don't know. Right now, I just know it goes east to west through that roadway. How it meanders throughout these properties, I don't know. But that would be either imposed upon the person who's going to develop now if we don't abandon it, or the future, whoever is going to develop it, or what parties are going to do it. We would still like to see how that flows, and if corrections need to be made, make them. If they don't need to be corrected and left in the natural state, prove it. And we would be more than glad to concur with those plans, but it should be engineered. I don't think they should walk off that easy without being looked at from that perspective.
Well, at this point in time, I'll entertain a motion, whatever that may be.
Mr. Chairman, in regard to the Powhatan Street Road abandonment, I would make a motion that we send a recommendation to the town council denying the abandonment based on the information that we currently have, and the memorandum from Mr. Duart dated June 14th, 2022. We would recommend to the council that in reviewing this issue, that they pay particular attention to current and future potential drainage issues. We also discussed encroachment issues that may currently exist. There seems to be some questions about the abutters and how the property may ultimately be divided, and whether there should be a restriction on the potentially abandoned road that would disallow any kind of construction or building on that portion of the property. So as the council debates this issue, we recommend that they take all those issues into account, but as based on the information we have this evening, we would recommend denying the abandonment.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Scown. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Wait a minute. Opposed? Okay, I will take a roll call and vote.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is a contrary vote. So by voting aye, we're rejecting as opposed to, so to just make sure that everyone that votes understands, if you will, without insulting anyone's intelligence, that they know how they're voting. In other words, if you vote yes, it's not approving, it's rejecting.
Correct,
Right.
but it still puts it in the hands of the town council. So if more information is provided to them, as it was laid out in Mr. Butler's motion, they should take the several factors that Mr. Butler had enumerated.
I
into
understand that. What I'm saying is when each of us votes, that we vote either yes or no, realizing that the vote is the opposite of what we usually do when we're approving or rejecting a motion.
don't.
Voting
bother
yes
Voting,
means saying no
voting
to the
yes means
council.
Okay.
no on the
Yeah, yes,
application.
okay. Yes means to deny.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, give me, is to deny. Everyone's clear on that. Ms. Fraschich. Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Butler,
Yes.
Mr. Scown,
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Ms. Reese.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Mr. D'Ambrosia. Mr. Costa. And the chair votes yes, the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Partington. Before we continue, I just want to note that Mr. Costa had entered the chambers at 7:25 PM.
No, I can, yeah.
Next item on the agenda is zoning board of review recommendation, applicant owner, Desmond Real Estate Ventures LLC, location 116 Curran Road, assessors plat, 6 lot 45. The applicant requests a recommendation to the zoning board of review for dimensional variances to construct a single-family dwelling. Mr. Modica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is requesting relief from front and rear yard setback requirements and maximum lot coverage to build a house on this corner lot, which is a legal non-conforming lot of record that's about 5,600 square feet. Minimum lot size in this district is 25,000 square feet. The property is at the northwest corner of Liberty Street and Curran Road, so it's a corner lot bounded by 2 public roads, which means it has 2 front yards and 2 rear yards. So even though this is a buildable lot, the required front yard setback of 20 feet and the required rear yard setback of 20 feet does not make it feasible to build a house on this lot. So the proposed house will be approximately 1,200 square feet, and the applicant is seeking 10 feet of relief from the front yard setback at 1 Liberty Street and 15 feet of relief from the rear yard setback opposite Liberty Street. Maximum allowable lot coverage is 20%, and the applicant is slightly over, including the house and the deck, and 1% of relief is requested. Planning department finds that the size of the proposed house is consistent with other houses in the neighborhood, and there will be no negative effects on the built environment. We find the project is consistent with the goals and purposes of the comprehensive plan, and we recommend forwarding a favorable recommendation to the zoning board of review for the requested relief.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Modica? Hearing none. Mr. Partington, is this yours?
Scott Partington for the applicant. Very briefly, again, Mr. Modica has pretty much covered all the bases, and I thank him for his efforts and the planning department's efforts in getting this on, considering all the work that's been going through that department lately. I do have, the developer is here for any questions. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's been done several times with the zoning board where we have these undersized lots, and in order to build a house that's of reasonable size and in keeping with the neighborhood, there are certain setback requirements that need to be met. So, but again, if there are any questions, I do have Mr. Damaris present, who is the principal of the applicant.
Mr. Partington.
Yeah.
Just so I'm certain I'm correct about this. This is a pre-existing lot, so it is buildable by right. correct?
Yes,
It's just the setbacks. were-
correct. That's correct,
Okay.
sir. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bush.
Board have any questions for Mr. Partington or the applicant? Mr. McDonald, did you have a question? Okay. Okay, do I have a motion?
Make a motion, Mr. Chairman, regarding the applicant's DeMar Real Estate Ventures LLC, property located at 116 Curran Road, assessors plat 6 lot 45, that the planning board make a positive recommendation to the zoning board of review in that the sought relief of 10 feet of relief for the front yard, 15 feet relief for the rear yard setback, and relief of 56 square feet for maximum lot coverage is consistent with the town's comprehensive plan. And that the memorandum from Mr. Modica to the board dated June 22nd, 2022 be included with the motion.
I have a motion by Mr. McDonald. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Costa. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item of business is town council recommendation, applicant owner Adrena Properties LLC, a location 490 High Street, Assessors Plat 7, Lot 237. The applicant requests a town council recommendation to rezone the property from R1 to C1. Mr. Modica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out, we do have one attendee on Zoom and there's a bunch of people in the room, so maybe it's not a bad idea to open public comments after.
Okay.
Just after the next three items. So this property is located at the northwest corner of High Street and West Earl. It includes a 2.5-story building completed in 1971. According to the Cumberland tax card from 1972, the building originally had a doctor's office on the lower level and 4 apartments above, 2 each on the first floor and 2 on the second floor. The dentist started occupying the property around 1992 and around 2015 expanded into half of the first floor, displacing one of the apartments. So now there are 3 apartments, 1 on the first floor and 2 on the second. So the dentist proposes to expand and fully occupy the first floor, leaving 2 apartments on the second floor. So this proposed ordinance would legally allow that expansion by rezoning the property from R2 two-family residential to C1 limited commercial. And the applicant's proposed ordinance amendment requests some exemptions, most of which are pre-existing non-conforming conditions, including parking space setbacks, the buffer between commercial and residential zones, maximum lot coverage. In terms of parking, the applicant needs 16 spaces, but he has 15, so he's just 1 short. The planning department finds that a medical use has occupied this building since it was completed just over 50 years ago, and the proposed ordinance meets the goals and purposes of the comprehensive plan. We are recommending the planning board forward a favorable recommendation to town council to approve this ordinance with 4 conditions: to place a bumper on the south side of the building in front of the 4 existing parking spaces, plant 2 trees on High Street, restrict the commercial use to medical or dental office, which is use 30, and to screen the trash container. Thank you.
Board have any questions for Mr. Modica? Is Mr. Partington, is this yours also?
Again, Scott Partington for the applicant. Again, I have to commend the planning department, again, for the work they put in on this. It's been a long process. For personal level, I mean, I've been going there. That's where my dentist was 100 years ago. And I'm glad that Dr. DeRose, who's taken over the practice, has decided to stay here in Cumberland. And he is present this evening if you have any questions at all for him. And it's just as Mr. Monica described, it's just a question of expanding to accommodate existing business. And I did note, and I appreciate also the notation or the indication from the planning department that they have done their due diligence and gone by and examined the parking situation and have not seen any problems with parking. So I think that the report covers, all possible issues. And we know that there are existing issues, pre-existing issues that need relief, and those will be addressed also as part of the council relief as well. And again, the doctor is present if there's any questions for him as well.
Board have any questions for Mr. Partington? Do I have a motion from the board?
Are we gonna do public comment? or-
Wasn't this one for public comment, was it?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't this item for public comment?
It's always a good idea.
Yeah. Well, okay, if there's anyone here in the audience, it's not listed as a public hearing. And that's
True.
usually what I
That's
go
true.
by. But out of, well, not just as a courtesy. Yes,
Right.
thank you. If there's anyone here that wishes to speak, please come forward and give us your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, board. Just wanted to, so I'm Dr. Paulo DeRosa. This last item that we're discussing, just wanted to make a minor correction. It states that when I purchased it in 2015, that I expanded to the first floor. That is incorrect. The previous dentist was already using half of the first floor. So, and one of the conditions when I moved in there was that at the time that we would keep the 50% residential, 50% business. So that's a minor just correction on that, that it was already half of the first floor along with the basement was all the dental office when I purchased it. And now I would just like to expand into the rest of the first floor. So just that minor little correction on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? Mr. Moga, is there anyone in the queue?
We do have one person, CMP. So CMP, if there's any item you want to. That's you? Okay. You want to say anything? All right. So we're set, Mr. Chair.
We're all set?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Again, we're at this point, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, in regards to 490 High Street Assessors Plat 7, Lot 237, I'd make a motion that we forward a recommendation of the town council that they should approve ordinance number 2213A as the proposed ordinance amendment does meet the goals and purposes of the comprehensive plan. We'd further recommend that they add the following conditions to their approval. That a raised curb bumper or wheel guards be installed on the south side of the building in front of the 4 existing parking spaces. That 2 October Glory maple trees with 2.5-inch to 3-inch caliper be planted on High Street. That the permitted use of the property be restricted to medical or dental office use number 30 going forward. And that the property shall comply with the zoning article 6-10 subsection A regarding screening of trash containers. And along with our recommendation forward to the town council, Mr. Modica's memo of June 23rd, 2022, which provides the finding of facts.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second? Second, Ms. Rashid. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item of
Chairman?
business.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Did you vote yes?
I'm sorry. Yes, I do vote
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. Item number 7, public hearing, comprehensive permit, major land development, master preliminary plan applicant owner. Please help me. I'm gonna, J-Row or in name? Thank you very much. Location 910 Mendon Road, Assessors Plat 34, Lot 114. The applicant requests approval of a comprehensive permit to add 2 affordable housing units in an existing former mixed-use building with 2 market rate housing units. Mr. Modica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a comprehensive permit application, which is a project that seeks to create 25% or more of the residential units as affordable. In this case, it's 2 out of 4, 50%. So for a comprehensive permit, it's the planning board that's the sole review board for any necessary relief. This is a 3-story building with a vacant commercial space on the ground floor. There's one apartment on the 2nd floor and one apartment on the 3rd floor. The applicant is proposing to convert the vacant ground floor former commercial space into 2 rental apartments for households earning 80% or less of area median income for a deed restricted term of 99 years. As you've heard at some recent planning board meetings, the town has only 6% of its housing stock as affordable, and we still need to reach the state mandated goal of 10%. There are no site improvements proposed at 910 Mendon Road. The applicant does own the adjacent property at 914 Mendon, where the applicant is proposing to tear down the 1-story concrete block addition to provide better access to the driveway and to the rear of the property. Since this driveway is partly on 914 Mendon Road, eventually when either or both of the properties are sold, an easement will need to be recorded, granting access across 914 Mendon to 910 Mendon. So the applicant is requesting several waivers from the planning board, which the planning board has to consider, with an understanding that the required findings place an emphasis on creating affordable housing. So these waivers are related to residential use of the commercial space and residential density, both of which are connected to creating affordable housing. There are several dimensional requirements that are pre-existing, including front and side yard setback and maximum lot coverage, parking space setbacks and dimensions, as well as a buffer between commercial and residential zones. Now, the property is adjacent to St. Joseph Cemetery, so we would like to see a buffer there. So the planning department is recommending approval of the comprehensive permit and a combined master and preliminary plan with one condition, that the applicant plant a row of arborvitae along the southern edge of the property to screen views from the cemetery.
Board have any questions for Mr. Modica?
Is that to benefit the people in the cemetery or the people in the? Just ask.
The visitors, yeah.
Does the applicant have a representative? Yes, Mr. Partington.
By the way, it's my microphone, even though I'm sure you can hear me. Scott Partington, once again, for the applicant here, and once again, Mr. Monica has issued a thorough report. And as he indicated, this is pursuant to state statute, this is the planning board consideration, once it has qualified as a comprehensive permit application, which as it has, we are here seeking a comprehensive permit pursuant to state statute. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and then the solicitor may correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that this is it's master and preliminary anyway, but I believe every state, every stage of the comprehensive permit is required public hearing, but I guess doesn't really matter because if it's combined, it has to be public hearing through the preliminary anyway. So with that, first of all,
Mr. Partington, there just needs to be a vote. There just needs to be a vote to combine master and preliminary,
Right.
but yes, otherwise, yes.
so I would imagine that would be taken, when would you prefer that be taken? I mean, I assume before the public hearing then? I think,
No,
I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
No, I think before they take their vote on the actual application, they can take the vote on combining.
I still think obviously that the public hearing should be open, for obvious reasons, so, okay. And I know that, just as a matter of housekeeping, I know that the report from the planning department is part of the record, just going to make a formal request that be for the record, that it be made part of the record, Mr. Barnica's report. And I also have Mr. Pimentel here to testify as to the report that he has submitted, as you, Mr. Monica has done, and as in Mr. Pimentel's report, he identifies specific items that have to be proven in for approval of a comprehensive permit. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Pimento, with your permission, I'm going to call him as a witness since we could open the public hearing.
Usually after his presentation, correct?
No,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, you should open the public hearing at the beginning of the presentation.
If you would like me to do that, I will do that. I will open the public hearing at 7:54 PM. Mr. Pimento.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board. First of all, I also want to thank Mr. Stevens and Mr. Monica. This really has been a collaborative effort over the last 2 years. Both attaining the letter of eligibility from Rhode Island Housing, which is a mandatory requirement. And then COVID hit and we were doing a lot by Zoom. I think the first Zoom meeting we had on this particular application goes back maybe even 2+ years. As we were working through the process of evidencing that the property just isn't viable for commercial use anymore and more appropriate for residential, did a neighborhood analysis. When I was talking to the applicant, I said, trying to sell 4 units, but this town desperately needs affordable housing. And I went through your comprehensive permit. And I said, if you're willing to give us affordable housing, you make my life a lot easier to make an application and presentation to the staff and then of course on to the planning board. He said, absolutely. I have no problem converting the 2 units to affordable housing. As this board well knows, most affordable housing projects are very difficult because number one, the applicant is usually seeking some kind of offsetting market rate density bonus. Here, the property already has 2 market rate residential units. Both of the units that we're providing are both going to be affordable. So it's a 50-50 ratio. So we're not adding any additional housing into the housing stock that we need to offset, right? A typical residential development, minimally, you at least ask for 10% to offset their contribution. We're not even contributing anything. If anything, we're contributing purely to offsetting and meeting your Rhode Island statutory requirements. That was number one. But the biggest thing, the collaborative thing that went on was, and I'm sure every member here knows this area much better than I ever did, but when you're traveling south or southeasterly, however you want to talk on Mendon, it's a very precarious turn into that driveway because of that barbershop outcropping. What was the great part of this was that the applicant acquired that property as well. My conversation with staff, and then I presented to the applicant was, we need to make this safer. This is the time, when you go through your development, is when you make things safer. I said, if we tear that down, not only does it open up the means of ingress and egress, rendering it so that you actually physically can take an ingress into the property traveling in a southeasterly, but when you're exiting the property, you have a 0 line of sight looking north. It's a 0. You have to inch into the roadway before you can tell. It's so ridiculous. And if you think about it, at one time there was commercial on both properties. So it's activity going in now. I can only imagine the situation. So I think this is a win-win situation. I did address all of the statutory requirements for the affordable housing. What's unique about this property is there is no site improvements, whereas a typical development, you're right, there's disturbance on the land. You're either developing a building or a series of buildings, or you're subdividing. None of that is happening here. If anything, it's a building permit to do an interior modifications to convert commercial to residential, and it's a demo permit to get rid of the barber shop. That's all that's required here. And we're absolutely accepting Mr. Monica's conditions in the landscaping, restriping the stall dimensions to make them more appropriately 9x18 and so forth. We're accepting that. The applicant has been holding off on doing a bit more exterior repairs on the garage and so forth until he was sure that he could proceed. He has a whole gamut of things he wants to do to make the site much more pleasant and aesthetically pleasing. But we have to go through the process first.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Pimentel? Yeah, go ahead.
I just like to say that that property has been improved by going by that so often. I want to commend the applicant for what he's done already. And I think this is a good project.
Thank you, sir. I have to say something. I've not only been a planner for 35 years, I've also been a zoning and enforcement officer for many years. And the first thing I'm always worried about is, have we jumped the gun here a little bit? I have been in and out of that property times. He has been a man of his word in regards to his permits just for the exterior. There has been no physical conversion inside yet. He didn't proceed. I said, do not, you can't take anything for granted, do not proceed, because if you don't get approved, you got to utilize it commercially. I don't know how, it's been difficult, but you'll have to. And he has been a man of his word. And yes, it's starting to look very attractive, the exterior.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense to continue commercial. There's no parking. And like you said, it was a very dangerous driveway to deal with. And by taking that barber shop building down, that's going to improve it dramatically.
Absolutely.
I agree with everything you said. So.
Just,
Mr. Costa?
Mr. Pimentel, looking at the map, is this driveway really 7.8 feet?
It is, the driveway is so narrow, you cannot take a turn into the driveway if you're traveling southeasterly. Every time I've entered this property, and I'm stating this, and I know I haven't been sworn on, but I'll say it regardless. I bypass the property, I go into the cemetery, I turn around, and then of course I have to traverse the other lane of traffic and I wait. I cannot physically enter this property because of the narrowness of that driveway.
Yeah, that I used to go to that barber shop and it's the same thing. I mean, that I used to just park in front of the cemetery and walk over because it was, you could not get into that driveway. You couldn't get out. You couldn't see anything. And I agree with Mr. Scout. I mean, Uncle Ronnie was there forever and Jim Colella was in the barber shop forever, but it just doesn't work, I think, commercially anymore in that neighborhood. And I think I agree with Mr. Scout that taking down the barber shop building, as much as it would hurt to see that go away, it's kind of a landmark. I do think it improves the safety of that area. So, and I agree, the applicant's done a great job remodeling the outside of that building.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
again,
Byington.
as Mr. Pimentel has pointed out, because this is a public hearing, I maybe after the fact at this point, but I'd like to swear him in as to the veracity of his testimony and also as to his the written report, which I would ask to be made part of the record. I think as it's a public hearing, I think that ought to be taken care of. They should to be under oath and he could swear to the truth of his testimony this evening.
That's your preference, because Mr. Pimentel has testified numerous times before this board.
Yeah, right. No, and I appreciate that. It's not a question of me accepting him as an expert witness. I appreciate that. It's a question for the rules of procedure that, you know, if this is a public hearing, that everything should be under oath. So I would, whoever would administer that oath, I don't know if it would be the solicitor or the planner or the chairman, then that I would think that for purposes of proper procedure that,
Typically, it's the solicitor.
Mr. Chairman, this is similar to a zoning meeting where there is a lot of relief being requested. So I would swear in the witness if you want to state your name and address for the record.
Edward Pimentel, that's P as in Paul, IMENTEL, and that's Cranston, Rhode Island.
And do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
for purposes of expediency, and again, with the solicitor's approval, I would simply ask Mr. Pimentel at this point and refer to his testimony that he's given over the past, I guess, maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes. And do you swear that the testimony you've already delivered to this board in connection with the matter at hand was the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I just
Mr.
wanted to add too, there were a couple of items, and I'm also moving the report in as an exhibit. There's an amended report, correct? Wasn't,
Yes.
okay.
The most second report.
And that's the one that was submitted to the planning board. Also that I just would like to point out too, there are two other items, and I believe they're addressed in the report that I think is significant, and that is that statutorily, the minimum would be 30 years for restrictions. We're going with the full 99 years on these restrictions. And also there's a minimum of, there's a 25% when you're, integrate the amount of affordable housing. This is 50. So it well exceeds what's required under the housing, under statutory requirements.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Board, have any other questions for Mr. Pimentel?
Thank you.
Thank you. As this is a public hearing and the public hearing has been opened, if there's anyone in the audience that wishes to speak at this, wait a minute, at this point in time, please come forward to the podium and give us your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Tim McCann. I am the owner of McTee's Tavern located at 940 Menden Road, a couple of doors down from the property. I'd also like to say that the property looks great. So you've really improved it. I have some questions, though, that when I got this letter, I wasn't quite sure what I was reading, and it might just be my misunderstanding. But this letter says, the purpose of this meeting is to consider the application for a comprehensive permit to construct 4 housing units. What I'm hearing is they're already constructed.
It wasn't worded very well,
Okay.
but
So
the,
I didn't read it wrong.
yeah,
Okay.
you're right.
Because when I read it, I felt that you were reconstructing something in the back. So I am, obviously, it's just,
Right.
I read it right, but, okay, I got you. So that was my only concern. I thought you were building something else in the back where the barns are, and I know there's an easement back, there's a right of way. So it's just going in where that front building is,
Just the building that's there.
and there's already 2 apartments in there.
Right.
And you're looking just to do the bottom floor. Good luck. It already looks great.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Alan Bourget, 17 Minden Road, directly across from the property. Lifelong resident of Cumberland, lived there for many, many years. Just a couple of comments on what's going on here. First of all, the application says that it's proposed to convert. Those units are almost wholly converted already. Just so.
The ones on the first floor?
Yes, just so you know, that there's a little history there where there was work going on, and then the next thing you know, there's cease and desist plastered on the windows, and then we haven't seen any activity, and now you got an app for a comprehensive permit. But that's, just for the record, property looks great. Comment on the barber shop, obviously, it's an eyesore. It's a huge safety factor. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, there was a mail truck that entered the property at, I would call, an excessive rate of speed, came out at the same velocity, and there was a runner with headphones going northbound on the sidewalk. And the mail truck came out another second, and the guy would have been flattened. He actually bumped off the mail truck. So, I mean, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my granddaughter, and I yelled at her. I said, Emily, pay attention, look what's gonna happen, just like that. And I couldn't believe the guy literally, so it is a safety factor. The second comment I'd like to make, if you can go to the Rhode Island Housing, page 2, site information. You'll see that, there's a list of questions, wetlands, no, flood area, no. And there was one that was left blank, and that's hazardous waste within a half mile radius. Hazardous waste sites, let me clarify that. As the crow flies, about a quarter of a mile is the EPA Peterson Puritan site, EPA Superfund site. So, possibly if that would have been checked, yes, with the, yes, describe, maybe Rhode Island Housing would have had a little bit of a different, look at this, possibly. Just putting it out there that there was an omission there, and I possibly would have triggered. There has to be some relevance if that article is being asked. So it was left blank. Possibly Rhode Island Housing also is at fault here, but it is within the Superfund site, just so people know. And the next comment is if you go to page 5, and this may be for Rhode Island Housing question, but just to make the record, picking one of the units, we'll take unit 1, 2-bedroom. Number of bedroom, actually we'll use the number 1, probably easier. it says two persons, the rental income is $13.85. Is that unit physically limited to occupancy of two, or can three people be there and obviously the rent is only two? So example is a newlywed couple rents that place, has an offspring, and that makes three people. Does that do anything to the affordable statute? Just a question.
Going on that column, one person, two person, three person, four.
Yeah, on the,
The other one is one bedroom.
yeah, one bedroom, two max for rental, but does that mean two person occupancy?
Could have a married couple in a one bedroom apartment.
Correct.
Could have a baby in a.
Yeah, so now this, I'm just saying, does that, are they designated that it's strictly a two person
These are rental units, right?
apartment?
I can speak to it.
Yeah, please, if you, yeah.
Ed,
Yeah.
Let me back on.
speak in the mic, Ed. Speak in the mic. Thank you.
I can't speak to any cease and desist issues. I've been involved in this project for 2 years. I have flowed through that property for 2 years. There are no kitchens, there are nothing. I can tell you, I do this every day from an enforcement perspective. It was my concern because he was doing construction. I said, are you moving a little fast? He goes, no, we had leaks, we had other problems. I started to move on it. If I don't get approved, the way it's laid out, it's gonna be commercial. I had to do this anyway. I saw the building permits in hand. If he attained those after my involvement, I can't speak to those. But when I was there, the process has been followed, and I state that under oath. In the preparation of this, I went back and forth with Rhode Island Housing, probably 6 to 8 months, constantly going back and forth, attaining information from the applicant, showing proof of ownership, the deed, working with the rental, because I had to bring him the information, the numbers that he'd have to work with and so on. They would come back with me with questions. The question regarding within a half a mile, they asked me that question. I honestly told them I don't know the answer to that, and I won't answer a question if I don't know it. They immediately called me back and said they were going to send one of their individuals to meet with the applicant at the property and to go over some of this stuff. And right after that meeting, I immediately received a letter of eligibility. I can only assume that goes to if there's actually going to be construction, right? So if you're disturbing a site, then they'd be concerned about the presence of wetlands and other sensitive features, as well as potential areas of contamination. There's no construction going on. There are no site constraints here because there are no site disturbances going on. And I think that's why I immediately after that appointment, we've seen the letter of eligibility.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Fine with
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Yes. Ms.
I
Sal-
also want to just weigh in on that. Thank you. We have been aware of the, construction and the attention to this property for probably close to 2 years now. No building permits have been issued for interior alterations. Frankly, that's an enforcement issue. With regard to the Rhode Island Housing approval, that is something that, obviously Rhode Island Housing has an application in hand with certain questions answered and or unanswered. Notwithstanding perhaps some questions being unanswered, they issued a letter of eligibility. That is what you will rely on. I'm not sure what the actual complaints are in terms of whether the speaker objects to this, but there's nothing in your packet that opposes the eligibility for this type of housing. That's
Mr. Partington.
again, I thank both individuals for their comments. I concur with the solicitor in that Rhode Island Housing, basically they reviewed the application and they issued a letter of eligibility. On the safe side, I did speak to Melina Hodge, who's executive director of the Rhode Island Housing Network, excuse me. She was been extremely helpful throughout this whole process. And I indicated there was a question about these applications. And basically she said, look, it's informational. I mean, if the individual takes who's interviewing the prospective applicant for eligibility, reviews, it may be of some consequence, it may not, but whatever the information that's been provided, they act on. It's an information gathering is all it is. It doesn't necessarily meet any thresholds or pursuant to any list that has to be checked off as you go through it. As a matter of fact, if you look at 425553, Ms. Salvatore, the Rhode Island Housing Mortgage Finance Corporation, and it talks about issuing letters of eligibility, it indicates that the corporation things that it should consider, and items like what district it's in or whether it's in a contamination site. Ms. Hodge also indicated that, look, to the extent that any building issues come forward, for instance, operating without a permit, which is a legitimate complaint, or anything like that, that they're confident that that's a local issue that can be enforced. But I concur wholeheartedly with Ms. Salvatore that, and Ms. Hodge echoed the sentiment as well, that, look, we reviewed the application, we issued a letter of eligibility, so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Partington. Mr. Modica, is there anyone in the queue or,
No, there's not.
okay, is there anyone else here that wishes to speak? Okay, thank you. Okay, want to hear from the board? Before I ask for a motion, the one thing I will say is I've driven by that building several times. And I can tell you, you've done a beautiful job with that building. I mean, when the first time I drove by, it's like I had to do a second take because I'm so used to driving by it, seeing what it used to be like when Uncle Ronnie was in business and so on. True, but you've done an outstanding job. It really looks nice. So that being said,
Do we have
Mr.
to
Butler?
close the public hearing?
Yes, I can do that.
No. Before we close the public hearing?
Okay,
Okay. Regards to 910 Mendon Road, Assessors Plot 34 Lot 114, I'll make a motion that we combine master and preliminary plans.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second? Second by Ms. Reese. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
I
Opposed? The chair votes yes. Motion carries. I will close the public hearing at 8:17 PM. And respect comments to the board.
Mr. Chairman, in regards to 910 Mendon Road, Assessors Plot 34 Lot 114, I'll make a motion that we approve the comprehensive permit with the condition that the applicant plant a row of arborvitae along the southern edge of the property and include with our decision, Mr. Modica's memo of June 22nd, 2022, which lays out the findings of fact, consistency with the comprehensive plan and the various waivers that have been requested and are being approved as part of the comprehensive permit.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second? Second by Ms. Reese. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes yes. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay. Next item of business is a public informational meeting, Major land development, master plan. Applicant owner Jason McCary, Berkeley Business LLC, location 30 Martin Street, assessors plat 34, lot 188. The applicant requests approval of the master plan to construct a solar car park. Mr. Modica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you said, this is a master plan review of major land development to build solar carports on this industrial property. They're gonna be located at the east and west edges of the property within an existing and a proposed parking lot. There's been a couple issues that we've identified with the project. At the eastern edge of the property will be, there's a row of trees that appear that they will be cut down. At the southern end of the property, parking will be extended without sufficient landscaping, we believe. But we spoke with the applicant earlier today. So we're anticipating to receive a landscape plan that will show areas of landscaping around the property. So we are recommending conditional approval of the master plan. And on top of page 3 of your memo, we had 4 bullets that were conditions for master plan approval. The first bullet we were recommending omitting. It's the one that stated about submitting a revised plan that does not involve tree removal. Our understanding is that these trees, they may be removed, but there may be new plantings at this location, and there'll be plantings at other locations around this property that may compensate for the loss of the trees in that location. So we're recommending including the last 3 bullets as conditions to master plan approval. Regarding the zoning recommendations or the variances that are going to be necessary, we stated in the staff report that this would be done at preliminary plan when we had a class 1 survey. We spoke with the solicitor, Ms. Morris, and in fact, we can proceed tonight with the recommendation to the zoning board of review regarding these requested variances, since it will be the zoning board that requires the class 1 survey. So basically, we know enough in terms of the variances. The only thing that's not precisely known is the solar setbacks from the side lot lines. But I think there is enough information in the master plan application where the board could make an informed decision. These solar panels are basically up to or very, very close to the side lot lines. So these variances are for carport height, and their carports are possibly 3 to 5 feet above the required 18 feet. Roof coverage is another variance where solar panels is supposed to be 4 feet from the edge of a roof. But this section of the ordinance pertains to real roofs on a building. So emergency personnel can walk around the roof. So this does not necessarily pertain to carports. Parking spaces have to be at least 10 feet from a side lot line, and there will be new spaces built alongside the railroad. And the side yard setbacks, which is supposed to be 10 feet. And it looks like the solar panels are going right to the edge of these lot lines. So we do find that the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and we are recommending forwarding a favorable recommendation to the zoning board of review for the requested relief.
Board have any questions from Mr. Mocha? Mr. McDonald.
Just one, could you just go over again the tree removal remark you made?
So they're removing trees at the eastern edge of the property
Okay,
above the granite block embankments. So they're going to submit a landscape plan that we're going to review, and we're going to scrutinize it to make sure that there's compensation for what is being removed and what is going to be proposed.
And to be clear, I think what we are hoping to do is, I mean, these are large mature trees which have an adverse impact on the performance of the solar panels. So what the applicant is agreeing to do is to remove those trees, but also plant new trees which will fortify the buffer for screening purposes while allowing for efficiency with exposure to the sunlight.
okay, so it's somewhat of a carbon neutral kind of thing, if you will, while allowing full efficiency for exposure for the panels to the sun.
Right, and they're going to bring in a landscape architect who's going to design it. Okay, right now you have essentially a tree line was never designed, but these trees are on above grade, and the solar panel structures are below. So if you were going to keep the tree line, you have to move those solar panels well into abutting the building.
Okay.
Another point I think is important is that the Berkeley Mill it's a beautiful National Register building. It's a large scale structure on a relatively small lot proportionately, as opposed to Ann and Hope, for example, that's on 15 acres. So it's admirable that the applicant is trying to revive the American Industrial Revolution by providing its own solar power as opposed to hydropower. And also these structures asking for relief for a little bit of height relief. You have to also take into context that this is a 4-story structure. So, and it abuts the P&W rail line. So we believe that, especially as they're going to be black structures, that they'll fit in. We want to recover a designed landscaping plan that we believe that we can negotiate.
All right, thank you.
Board have any other questions?
Yes, just
Mr.
can you
Bush.
tell me, Mr. Stevens, why is it 23 feet high, the rooftops of these carports? Are they? Is that how the height they are then?
That may be a question better directed to the applicant.
Microphone.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Scott Partington for the applicant. As a matter of fact, Mr. Bush, I noticed that earlier, that Mr. Modak had put in, again, fantastic report. I've got to give credit where credit is due. And again, the efforts of the planning department in this respect, again, I know there's been an awful lot, you guys know better than anybody, there's been an awful lot of stuff going to planning lately, and it's been backed up. So, we truly do appreciate it. We don't always agree, but we do appreciate it when we should. So with respect to the 23 feet, I by the way, in the interest of expediency, and whatever information you need to see is fine. I mean, it's an informational meeting. I have Mr. McCary here. I have solar, the representative from the solar company here. And also I have the actual engineer for construction related questions. Mr. Bush, I did note that 23 feet. Originally, it was the height in section 17 of the zoning ordinance, which governs the solar construction. The height limit was at 18 feet. And the initial request that I got was going to be, I think the original request for the zoning board is 20 1/2 that we were looking for. So 2.5 feet. I could be off by a half inch or whatever, but that's what we requested. Now, I did ask the engineer if 23 is the first time I heard 23, but he said that, it depends on the pitch and that can be adjusted. Mr. Cameron, you wouldn't mind coming up and addressing that? I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, by the way.
All new to me, so a little awkward. Question of the height is typically.
Yes.
Oh, Brad
I was going
Carlson.
to ask him, but I didn't want to interrupt him.
No, it's Brad Carlson from Solar Carports. We're solar canopy designers and installers. On the low side of the carport, we always maintain a height of 14 feet, which will accommodate everything, including a ladder truck, DOT. We don't want to have any interference on the low side. The height on the high side is determined by how many modules it is high versus the pitch of of the tilt to pick up the best, the optimum use of the solar panel to recover the energy. I had my computer open, but I think on the west elevation, I think we're at 20 feet 2 as on the high side. I think the 23-foot elevation is sort of deceptive because it's 14 feet above the driveway on the eastern side adjacent to that elevated wall. And then it's 7 feet higher than the grass that's on the top of it. So if you're measuring it from grade, yes, it's 23 feet, but if you're measuring it from above ground at the 2 levels, it's really 7 or 8 feet.
Oh.
All right.
Any other questions?
Question.
Mr. Costa?
Were these this photograph here I'm looking at has this carport here? Was there ever a roof on this or was this erected just for the solar panels? Okay. It's brand new. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Reese?
It's on the national register, but it's not in a local historic district. So it's not locally, the Historic District Commission doesn't have purview.
There is one next door. So the car next door.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Partington.
Thank you very much. So, and I, again, what situation, I just wanted to make sure that, whatever, only for master, we initially had attended for preliminary, but again, as Mr. Modak has explained, there were some other issues that had come up with the extension of the parking lot that required that we go back with some landscaping plans to accommodate the requirements for preliminary. So we are limited to master, which, as you well know, is sort of a skeletal type of approval. It's a preliminary, well, it's not a preliminary, but it's a master plan. But I wanted to point one other thing out, and I'm sure Mr. Monica addressed this, but yeah, we addressed also the fact that the parking setback, right, Glenn? Did you-
From the side lot line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the bottom, okay,
Right.
right. Because if any of you have looked at, and I don't know if you have the most recent copy of the zoning application, it was amended. I sent it out and it was amended. And the only thing that was changed on it was added to was the parking, which is, I think it's 14-2B, I believe, in the zoning ordinance, which requires, as Mr. Modak has set forth. So that appears also on that. So if there's enough information, I just wanted to make sure, since it's only informational hearing, I just want to make sure that if you had any questions at all about, development of this type, not all too common, that the correct people were here to address those questions.
Any other questions for Mr. Partington? Yeah, thank you.
Right, and if anything comes up, I just wanted to also
Okay.
make sure that if they are going to give advisories, Mr. Monica, I think you indicated that earlier, correct?
For the zoning board.
That just keep in mind what is under what on the parking setback.
Okay. As this is an informational meeting, is there anyone in the audience or in the queue that has any questions or comments regarding this proposed project?
Mr. Partington,
Yes.
is this building fully occupied?
I don't believe so. Right, top floor is not occupied, correct, Mr. McCary? Currently. 90%,
And these solar panels are for this particular building?
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa.
I don't remember, Mr. Costa, if you were with us, but we did take a nice little
Field trip?
field trip. Mr. Stevens, Mr. Bush, Ms. Reese, The improvements that have been made to the building is just unbelievable. Yeah, they are incredible. There's no doubt about it. Mr. McCarry's done a really great job. And that was a very large undertaking I mean, I don't know how many tenants you have in there, but the ones that we did see I think there's a dance studio, was it? Yeah. And then there was a corporate offices, I think, for some concern, but the inside was just gorgeous.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Modica, the difference between this and Ann Hope is that this is not in a historic district, is that it?
It's not in a local historic district, so
Right.
the HDC wouldn't see this.
Anything else from the board? We do have these two zoning issues to address, correct?
We have 4
I'm sorry.
zoning
I'm looking at two sheets here,
variances.
but yeah.
And I just want to confirm with our solicitor, because this wasn't on the agenda,
Mhm.
that Kelly, I'm wondering, can the planning board vote on the zoning board recommendations?
No, it's not on the agenda. You're correct. No, it's not on the agenda, the recommendations. I did advise, I noted that earlier when I went through. So, I mean, it does not have to be advertised. It's a solicitor's call. And hopefully, we can accommodate the town planning department to get on for preliminary in July. We have some time constraints and which I think probably at the next meeting, or I know that Mr. Macari has related those concerns to the planning department. Who've been very receptive. And if we can meet the next deadline, even if worst case scenario, if we don't, we can at least get our advisories at the July meeting, because we got put off until the August meeting because there was someone recused. There was only 5 members of the zoning board, 1 recused, so we can't go forward on our zoning in July anyway. So we could conceivably, if there's any issue about notice, which obviously I wouldn't want in a project of this import, I would, we can always come back for our advisory to the board on the 27th, even if we don't have preliminary, but I hope that we do by that time.
Mr. McDonald,
Yeah, I'm confused. Are we saying that
Mr.
tonight?
Chairman,
wait a minute, Ms. Salvatore?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I hope I can clear this up for you. So I understand, I think I heard earlier today that the zoning board will not have a quorum in August. It also happens to be that your recommendation to the zoning board is not on your agenda tonight, which would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. It has nothing to do with zoning law. It's an open meetings requirement for you to have that listed on your agenda. So my suggestion is that if they're coming back for preliminary plan,
Well, either way.
that
and I
you make
appreciate that.
recommendations.
I agree with the solicitor. I noted that to somebody I spoke with this morning. I'm not sure if it was, maybe it was someone from Infusion, but no, we would, and even if by chance in a worst case scenario, we're not able to meet the deadline for the preliminary, I would just ask that it be put on for, and I'll send a letter backing it up, that we have our advisory on the next meeting, because it still covers us for the August meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're still covered.
Right.
Good. Sounds like a
But
plan.
again, you don't need any special advertising for a recommendation.
No, but
You
it
just
was
need
not
to
listed
meet
on
the
the agenda. You're right.
Right.
Right, it just needs to be on the agenda, and that's my only concern.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
can't disagree.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McDonald?
I think that's what I was going to ask, just so it's clear in my own head, that we would be voting tonight on approving a master plan, which would involve the conditions, the 4 conditions or 4 conditions on page 3, with the understanding that
Right.
the recommendations of the zoning board would be voted upon at a future meeting, which may be combined with preliminary plan. Is that right?
Exactly.
All I was gonna say is I would be uncomfortable with voting on variances to the zoning board without it being advertised. That's asking for trouble.
Agreed.
And I-
Then, and by the way, Mr. McDonald, just purpose, I'm sure the motion will be straightened out, but there, if you can recall, there are only 3 conditions now. The first one was removed by Mr. Modica regarding the trees.
Okay.
Well, he had mentioned about the zoning ordinances and so on, I mean, relief. And we kind of wanted to bring it up, get it on record and make sure we're all on the same page.
So can any type of motion be made on this tonight?
Well, the applicant requests approval of the master plan to construct a solar carport, just a request for approval of the master plan.
And this is, and as you know, Mr. Cuss, this is the normal course. I mean, is that, when you need a zoning relief, you get your first level, here, and then you go to zoning and then come back here for preliminary. Now, so that's what we're gonna hopefully be doing.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion in regards to 30 Martin Street, Assessors Plot 34, Lot 188, that we approve master plan as it is consistent with the goals and purposes of the comprehensive plan, with the following conditions. 1, that a landscape plan prepared by a registered landscape architect be submitted for preliminary plan that follows Cumberland's development plan review standards. Number 2, that the applicant will consult with the Public Works Department regarding stormwater management for the parking lot extension, drainage plans, and a stormwater management report may be required. Any documents required by the Public Works Department shall be submitted at preliminary plan. And number 3, all plans submitted for preliminary plan shall include all applicable items from the preliminary plan checklist. I would include with our decision Mr. Stevens' memo of June 23rd, 2022, which has the findings of fact regarding consistency with the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion by Mr. Butler. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. D'Ambrosio. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Chair votes yes. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Partington. Next item is public comments. Make a comment? You can, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just like to recognize our planning staff, Mr. Stevens and Mr. Modica and Mrs. Salvatore. You guys have done a great, and lady, have done a great job over the last few months. It's been very comprehensive, the work that you've done. It's been very helpful, I think, to all of us. I speak for myself, at least on that. And I really appreciate the effort that you've put in over the last few months. It's been tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, I think that's the sentiment of the entire board. And you also get a raise. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. D'Ambrosio, seconded by the entire board. All in favor? The ayes have it.